Now we have, for your pleasure, a fun fact before starting the reading. Just information got passed in this morning, breaking news, if you wish. These are the forests of Vrindavan. The east side, there's 5 forests: Bhadra, Bilva, Loha, Bandira, and Mahavana. Then there's the river Jamuna on the other side, the western side. There's 7 forests: Madhu, Tala, Kumuda, Bahula, Kamya, Kandira, and Vrindavan. After visiting all these forests, pilgrims went to a place known as Panchakroshi, Vrindavan. Out of the 12 forests, the Vrindavan forest extends from the town of Vrindavan up to Nandagram and Varshana, a distance of 32 miles, within which the Panchakrosha Vrindavan town is situated, as spoken by Srila Prabhupada in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 5.12. Can anybody besides Vamshuli remember all of them off the top of your head? You're disqualified. He has a photographic memory. Okay. We'll try for another lucky winner later. Thank you. Collect them, trade them with your friends. We're continuing with our reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. 3rd canto, 9th chapter, the Brahma's prayers for creative energy. And I must say, these have been some of the most impactful purports, significant, poignant. And let's see where we're taking up. 32, thank you very much. Every yajna has referees. And luckily, Samyaprasa is back to help with that. 32. You will see me in all living entities as well as all over the universe, just as fire is situated in wood. Only in that state of transcendental vision will you be able to be free from all kinds of illusion. Purport: Brahma prayed that he might not forget his eternal relationship with the Lord during the course of his material activities. In answer to that prayer, the Lord said that he should not think of existing without a relationship with his omnipotency. The example is given of the fire in wood. The fire kindled in wood is always the same, although the wood may be of different types. Similarly, the bodies within the material creation may be specifically different according to shape and quality, but the spirit souls within them are not different from one another. The quality of fire, warmth, is the same everywhere, and the spiritual spark or part and parcel of the Supreme Spirit is the same in every living being. Thus, the potency of the Lord is distributed all over his creation. This transcendental knowledge alone can save one from the contamination of material illusion. Since the Lord's potency is distributed everywhere, a pure soul or devotee of the Lord can see everything in relationship with the Lord, and therefore he has no affection for the outer coverings. That pure spiritual conception makes him immune to all contamination of material association. The pure devotee never forgets the touch of the Lord in all circumstances. When you are free from the conception of gross and subtle bodies, and when your senses are free from all influence of the modes of material nature, you will realize your pure form in my association. At that time, you will be situated in pure consciousness. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that a person whose only desire is to render transcendental loving service to the Lord is a free person in any condition of material existence. Worth repeating if you don't mind. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that a person whose only desire is to render transcendental loving service to the Lord is a free person in any condition of material existence. That service attitude is the sarup, or real form of the living entity. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Chaitanya Charitamrita also confirms this statement by declaring that the real spiritual form of the living entity is eternal servitorship to the Supreme Lord. The Mayavadi school shudders at the thought of a service attitude in the living entity, not knowing that in the transcendental world the service of the Lord is based on transcendental love. Transcendental loving service is never to be compared to the forced service of the material world. In the material world, even if one is under the conception that he is no one's servant, he is still the servant of his senses, under the dictation of the material modes. Factually, no one is master here in the material world, and therefore the servants of the senses have a very bad experience of servitude. They shudder at the thought of service because they have no knowledge of the transcendental position. In transcendental loving service, the servitor is as free as the Lord. The Lord is swarat, or fully independent, and the servant is also fully independent, or swarat, in the spiritual atmosphere because there is no forced service. There, the transcendental loving service is due to spontaneous love. A reflected glimpse of such service is experienced in the service of the mother unto the son, the friend's service unto the friend, or the wife's service unto the husband. These reflections of service by friends, parents, or wives are not forced, but are due only to love. Here in this material world, however, the loving service is only a reflection. The real service, or service in Swarup, is present in the transcendental world in association with the Lord. The very same service in transcendental love can be practiced in devotion here. This verse is applicable to the Jnani school. The enlightened Jnani, when free from all material contaminations, namely the gross and subtle bodies, together with the senses of the material modes of nature, is placed in the Supreme and is thus liberated from material bondage. The Jnanis and the devotees are actually in agreement up to the point of liberation from material contamination. But whereas the Jnanis remain pacified on the platform of simple understanding, the devotees develop further spiritual advancement in loving service. The devotees develop a spiritual individuality in their spontaneous service attitude. The devotees develop a spiritual individuality in their spontaneous service attitude, which is enhanced on and on up to the point of Madhurya Ras, or transcendental loving service, reciprocated between the lover and the beloved. 34. Since you have desired to increase the population innumerably and expand your varieties of service, you shall never be deprived in this matter, because my causeless mercy upon you will always increase for all time. Purport. A pure devotee of the Lord, being cognizant of the facts of the particular time, object, and circumstances, always desires to expand the number of devotees of the Lord in various ways. Such expansions of transcendental service may appear to be material to the materialist, but factually they are expansions of the causeless mercy of the Lord towards the devotee. Plans for such activities may appear to be material activities, but they are different in potency, being engaged in the satisfaction of the transcendental senses of the Supreme. 35. You are the original Rishi, and because your mind is always fixed on me, even though you will be engaged in generating various progeny, the vicious mode of passion will never encroach upon you. Purport. The same assurance is given to Brahmā in the second canto, chapter 9, verse 36. Being so favored by the Lord, Brahma's schemes and plans are all infallible. Even If sometimes Brahmā is seen to be bewildered, as in the 10th canto, he is bewildered by seeing the action of the internal potency. That is also for his further advancement in transcendental service. Arjuna is found to be similarly bewildered. All such bewilderment of the pure devotees of the Lord is specifically meant for their further advancement in knowledge of the Lord. That's something. It's not nothing. 36. Although I am not easily knowable by the conditioned soul, you have known me today because you know that my personality is not constituted of anything material, and specifically not the 5 gross and 3 subtle elements. Knowledge of the Supreme Absolute Truth does not necessitate negation of the material manifestation, but understanding of spiritual existence as it is. To think that because material existence is realized in forms, therefore spiritual existence must be formless is only a negative material conception of spirit. The real spiritual conception is that spiritual form is not material form. Brahmā appreciated the eternal form of the Lord in that way, and the personality of Godhead approved of Brahmā's spiritual conception. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord condemned the material conception of Krishna's body, which arises because he is apparently present like a man. The Lord may appear in any of his many, many spiritual forms, but he is not materially composed, nor has he any difference between body and self. That is the way of conceiving the spiritual form of the Lord. 37. When you were contemplating whether there was a source to the stem of the lotus of your birth, and you even entered into that stem, you could not trace out anything. But at that time I manifested my form from within. Purport. The personality of Godhead can be experienced only by his causeless mercy, not by mental speculation or with the help of the material senses. Material senses cannot approach the transcendental understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He can be appreciated only by submissive devotional service when he reveals himself before the devotee. Only by love of Godhead can one know God, and not otherwise. The personality of Godhead cannot be seen with the material eyes, but he can be seen from within by spiritual eyes opened by the ointment of love of Godhead. As long as one's spiritual eyes are closed due to the dirty covering of matter, one cannot see the Lord. But when the dirt is removed by the process of devotional service, one can see the Lord without a doubt. Brahmā's personal endeavor to see the root of the lotus pipe failed, but when the Lord was satisfied by his penance and devotion, he revealed himself from within with no external endeavor. 38. O Brahmā, the prayers that you have chanted praising the glories of my transcendental activities, the penances you have undertaken to understand me, and your firm faith in me, all these are to be considered my causeless mercy. When a living entity desires to serve the Lord in transcendental living service, the Lord helps the devotee in so many ways as the caitya-guru, or the spiritual master within, and thus the devotee can perform many wonderful activities beyond material estimation. By the mercy of the Lord, even a layman can compose prayers of the highest spiritual perfection. Such spiritual perfection is not limited by material qualifications, but is developed by dint of one's sincere endeavor to render transcendental service. Voluntary endeavor is the only qualification for spiritual perfection. I repeat. We'll make it a sign above the door. In the kitchen. Voluntary. Voluntary endeavor is the only qualification for spiritual perfection. Material acquisitions of wealth or education are not considered. I am very much pleased by your description of me in terms of my transcendental qualities, which appear mundane to the mundaners. I grant you all benedictions to your desire to glorify all the planets by your activities. Purport. A pure devotee of the Lord like Brahmā and those in his line of disciplic succession always desire that the Lord be known all over the universe by each and every one of the living entities. That desire of the devotee is always blessed by the Lord. The impersonalist sometimes prays for the mercy of the personality of Godhead Narayan as the embodiment of material goodness, but such prayers do not satisfy the Lord because he is not thereby glorified in terms of his actual transcendental qualities. The pure devotees of the Lord are always most dear to him, although he is always kind and merciful to all living entities. Here the word gunamayam is significant because it indicates the Lord's possessing transcendental qualities. 40. Any human being who prays like Brahmā and who thus worships me shall very soon be blessed with the fulfillment of all his desires, for I am the Lord of all benediction. The prayers offered by Brahmā cannot be chanted by anyone who desires to fulfill his own sense gratification. Such prayers can be selected only by a person who wants to satisfy the Lord in his service. The Lord certainly fulfills all desires in regard to transcendental loving service, but he cannot fulfill the whims of non-devotees, even when such casual devotees offer him the best of prayers. It is the opinion of expert transcendentalists that the ultimate goal of performing all traditional good works, penances, sacrifices, charities, mystic activities, trances, etc., is to invoke my satisfaction. Purport. There are many traditionally pious activities in human society such as altruism, philanthropy, nationalism, internationalism, charity, sacrifice, penance, and even meditation and trance, and all of them can be fully beneficial only when they lead to the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The perfection of any activity, social, political, religious, or philanthropic, is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. This secret of success is known to the devotee of the Lord as exemplified by Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. As a good non-violent man, Arjuna did not want to fight with his kinsman. But when he understood that Krishna wanted the fight and had arranged it at Kurukshetra, he gave up his own satisfaction and fought for the satisfaction of the Lord. That is the right decision for all intelligent men. One's only concern should be to satisfy the Lord by one's activities. If the Lord is satisfied by an action, whatever it may be, then it is successful. Otherwise, it is simply a waste of time. That is the standard of all sacrifice, penance, austerity, mystic trance, and other good and pious work. I am the supersoul of every individual. I am the supreme director and the dearest. People are wrongly attached to the gross and subtle bodies, but they should be attached to me only. The Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, is the dearest in both the conditioned and liberated states. When a person does not know that the Lord is the only dearmost object, then he is in the conditioned state of life, and when one knows perfectly well that the Lord is the only dearmost object, he is considered to be liberated. There are degrees of knowing one's relationship with the Lord, depending on the degree of realization as to why the Supreme Lord is the dearmost object of every living being. The real reason is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita 15:7. Mamai vamsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. The living entities are eternally parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. The living entity is called the Atma, and the Lord is called the Paramatma. The living entity is called Brahman, and the Lord is called Parabrahman, or the Parameshvara. Ishvara Parama Krishna. The conditioned souls who do not have self-realization accept the material body as the dearmost. The idea of the dearmost is then spread all over the body, both concentrated and extended. The attachment for one's own body and its extensions, like children and relatives, is actually developed on the basis of the real living entity. As soon as the real living entity is out of the body, even the body of the most dear son is no longer attractive. Therefore, the living spark, or eternal part of the Supreme, is the real basis of affection and not the body. Because the living entities are also parts of the whole living entity, that Supreme living entity is the factual basis of affection for all. One who has forgotten the basic principle of his love for everything has only flickering love because he is in Maya. The more one is affected by the principle of Maya, the more he is detached from the basic principle of love. One cannot factually love anything unless he is fully developed in the loving service of the Lord. One cannot factually love anything unless he is fully developed in the loving service of the Lord. In the present verse, stress is given to focusing love upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word kuryat is significant here. This means one must have it. It is just to stress that we must have more and more attachment to the principle of love. The influence of Maya is experienced by the part and parcel spiritual entity, but it cannot influence the supersoul, the Paramatma. The Mayavadi philosophers, accepting the influence of Maya on the living entity, want to become one with the Paramatma. But because they have no actual love for Paramatma, they remain ever entrapped by the influence of Maya and are unable to approach the vicinity of Paramatma. This inability is due to their lack of affection for the Paramatma. A rich miser does not know how to utilize his wealth, and therefore, in spite of his being very rich, his miserly behavior keeps him everlastingly a poor man. On the other hand, a person who knows how to utilize wealth can quickly become a rich man, even with a small credit balance. The eyes and the sun are very intimately related because without sunlight, the eyes are unable to see. But the other parts of the body, being attached to the sun as a source of warmth, take more advantage of the sun than do the eyes. Without possessing affection for the sun, the eyes cannot bear the rays of the sun. Or in other words, such eyes have no capacity to understand the utility of the sun's rays. Similarly, the empiric philosophers, despite their theoretical knowledge of Brahman, cannot utilize the mercy of the Supreme Brahman because they lack affection. So many impersonal philosophers remain everlastingly under the influence of Maya, because although they indulge in theoretical knowledge of Brahman, they do not develop affection for Brahman, nor do they have any scope for development of affection because of their defective method. A devotee of the sun god, even though devoid of eyesight, can see the sun god as he is even from this planet, whereas one who is not a devotee of the sun cannot even bear the glaring sunlight. Similarly, by devotional service, even though one is not on the level of a jnani, one can see the personality of Godhead within himself due to his development of pure love. In all circumstances, one should try to develop love of Godhead, and that will solve all contending problems. In all circumstances, one should try to develop love of Godhead, and that will solve all contending problems. 43. By following my instructions, you can now generate the living entities as before, by dint of your complete Vedic wisdom and the body you have directly received from me, the supreme cause of everything. The sage Maitreya said, after instructing Brahmā, the creator of the universe, to expand, the primeval Lord, the personality of Godhead, in his personal form as Narayan, disappeared. Before his activity in creating the universe, Brahmā saw the Lord. That is the explanation of the Chatushloki Bhagavatam. When the creation awaited Brahma's activity, Brahmā saw the Lord, and therefore the Lord existed, in his personal form before the creation. His eternal form is not created by the attempt of Brahmā, as imagined by less intelligent men. The personality of Godhead appeared as he is before Brahmā, and he disappeared from him in the same form, which is not materially tinged. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 9th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Brahma's Prayers for Creative Energy. Bravo. Sadhu, sadhu. Chapter 10, Divisions of Creation. Sri Vidura said, O great sage, please let me know how Brahmā, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. O greatly learned one, kindly eradicate all my doubts and let me know of all that I have inquired from you, from the beginning to the end. Vidura asked all relevant questions of Maitreya because he knew well that Maitreya was the right person to reply to all the points of his inquiries. One must be confident about the qualifications of his teacher. One should not approach a layman for replies to specific spiritual inquiries. Such inquiries, when replied to with imaginative answers by the teacher, are a program for wasting time. Sutta Goswami said, O son of Bhrigu, the great sage Maitreya Muni, thus hearing from Vidura, felt very much enlivened. Everything was in his heart, and thus he began to reply to the questions one after another. The phrase Sutta Uvacha, Sutta Goswami said, appears to indicate a break in the discourse between Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami. While Shukadeva Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, Sutta Goswami was only one member of a large audience. But Sutta Goswami was speaking to the sages of Naimisharanya, headed by the sage Shaunaka, a descendant of Shukadeva Goswami. This, however, does not make any substantial difference in the topics under discussion. The greatly learned sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, Brahmā thus engaged himself in penances for 100 celestial years, as advised by the Personality of Godhead, and applied himself in devotional service to the Lord. Purport: that Brahmā engaged himself for the Personality of Godhead Narayan means that he engaged himself in the service of the Lord. That is the highest penance one can perform for any number of years. There is no retirement from such service, which is eternal and ever encouraging. Thereafter Brahmā saw that both the lotus on which he was situated and the water on which the lotus was growing were trembling due to a strong, violent wind. Purport: the material world is called illusory because it is a place of forgetfulness of the transcendental service of the Lord. Thus, one engaged in the Lord's devotional service in the material world may sometimes be very much disturbed by awkward circumstances. There is a declaration of war between the two parties, the illusory energy and the devotee, and sometimes the weak devotees fall victim to the onslaught of the powerful illusory energy. Lord Brahmā, however, was sufficiently strong by the causeless mercy of the Lord, and he could not be victimized by the material energy, although it gave him cause for anxiety when it managed to totter the existence of his position. Long penance and transcendental knowledge of self-realization had matured Brahmā in practical knowledge, and thus he drank the wind completely along with the water. Purport: Lord Brahmā's struggle for existence is a personal example of the continued fight between the living entities in the material world and the illusory energy called Maya. Beginning from Brahmā down to this age, the living entities are struggling with the forces of material nature. By advanced knowledge in science and transcendental realization, one can try to control the material energy which works against our endeavors, And in the modern age, advanced material scientific knowledge and penance have played very wonderful roles in controlling the powers of the material energy. Such control of the material energy, however, can be most successfully carried out if one is a soul surrendered unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead and carries out his order in the spirit of loving transcendental service. 7. Thereafter he saw that the lotus on which he was situated was spread throughout the universe, and he contemplated how to create all the planets which were previously merged in that very same lotus. Purport: the seeds of all the planets in the universe were impregnated in the lotus on which Brahmā was situated. All the planets were already generated by the Lord, and all the living entities were also born in Brahmā. The material world and the living entities were all already generated in seedling forms by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Brahmā was to disseminate the same seedlings all over the universe. The real creation is therefore called Sarga, and later on, the manifestation by Brahmā is called Visarga. Thus engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Brahmā entered into the whorl of the lotus, and as it spread all over the universe, he divided it into 3 divisions of worlds, and later into 14 divisions. And now we'll take a few reflections or questions. Yes, Mukaravind.
A remark, out of 7 oceans, Prabhupada always select Pacific Oceans. I was just wondering that is Pacific Ocean he loves more than any other for saying example of froggish philosophers.
Yeah, that's true.
Lucky to be in Pacific Ocean.
I'd comment, but it would be self-serving and prideful. Vamshuli, and then Samya Prash.
Guru Maharaj, one question about how to cultivate strength to stay steady in service when there are difficulties or the environment becomes more challenging.
Well, one thing is to improve on your chanting japa. So japa has to be one-pointed. And there's a way in which, I'm just reading this morning with Devavrata from the Sankalpa Kaumudi, and there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna's talking about how to fix the mind. And in the purport, probably gives a story of a little bird whose eggs were stolen away by the ocean, and she wants to get them back. So she very determinedly starts pecking out the water of the ocean, and everyone else laughs at her. And in the story we read from the commentary, Narada comes along and sees the situation and then informs Garuda, who then comes to her assistance. One of the points that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says in the process, one should be ready to take drop by drop, drain the ocean with the tip of a kusha straw. And so we can improve our japa unlimitedly. It's not a lost cause, or it's just you get it done for the sake of doing it. It's a practice. It's the only one thing that Prabhupada asked us to do. A lot are do-nots, but it's the only one thing. He said at least 16 rounds. And if we give that as serious consideration and turn it into a serious practice, as one might, let's say, to become an Olympic ice skater, foregoes everything else in their youth just so they can have that one shot. And if we have that similar dedication to japa, then there's a natural way in which we get determination and spiritual strength by the power of the holy name and especially our attention to the holy name, because that's the root cause of all of our disappointments is that we don't give enough attention to the holy name when we're chanting. So that can be practiced, and it's something that can be developed. Any other reflections or questions? 1, 2.
In chapter 9, verse 38, I really like that Krishna said, Brahmā, the prayers you have chanted, the penances you've undertaken to understand me, and your firm faith, all these are my causeless mercy. So the ability to glorify Krishna properly is actually a function of his mercy. And the trouble you take to try to understand him is also a function of his mercy. Like, that's actually something you can be grateful for. Doesn't Bhaktivinoda Thakur sing something like, whatever obstacles I face in the course of trying to serve you, I consider them my treasure, or something. And then, and your faith. So, like, it's easy to think, the faith we have is mercy, but the ability to even speak properly about Krishna and all the trouble you go to try to understand him is also part of his mercy. He himself says. I thought that was pretty telling.
It is. There is a point at which, however, we realize our own free will, as it comes directly in front of us when we're paying attention, we can see the choice, and the point of power is in deciding to serve Krishna. One's sincere earnestness. That's real. That's what sincerity means. Is I see the opportunity and I say, yes, I'll do it. Sarvadharamam Parityajan, you say, I'll sign up for it. I'll sign the box. I'll put my signature on it. I'll check it off. And I'm doing it. Come what may, and however inept I am right now at achieving it, I'm going to do it. That's our sincerity, that's free will. And that's what evokes the Lord's help and the flow of mercy.
I wanted to share something, and it turns out to be very related to what you just said. That this first sentence of the purport to 930 is the line that convinced me to accept the service of being zonal supervisor, because the devotees were asking me to do it, and I was just like, I'm not qualified. It's so much. And then I read this: the mercy the Lord bestows upon a particular person engaged in executing the responsible work entrusted unto him is beyond imagination. I was just like, okay, well, if I'm going to get mercy beyond imagination, then yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and actually a lot of mercy has come in that service.
Yeah, Prabhupada emphasizes in several places practical service. I'm trying to remember, what's that verse? Where he emphasizes practical service by manual labor. Yeah, what's the verse? Here, it's in this book, in the 10th canto. I know it's in there, but he talks about that by manual labor. So there's... Any last points from the outside? Yes, Mahendra from the inside.
Outside?
Mahendra? What?
Srinvan Sam
Srinvanti Giran. Oh.
Srinvan Giran Sam Ayam Shachintaya Nama Nirupani Mangalani
Te
Kriyasu Yat
Tascharana Ravindayo
Avishta
Cheta
Nabhavaya
Kalpate. It's the Kriyasu by manual labor. Go ahead. Thank you.
Just in the purport of 5th verse, I was struck how Prabhupada explains that one engaged in the service can be very much disturbed by awkward circumstances. And sometimes the weak fall down because of the influence of the illusory energy, but those who are strong, they continue, but still, he says that although it gives cause for anxiety. So, yes, the point is, you always have some troubles even when fully engaged in service.
Especially when engaged fully in service. No, really, because the management means solving problems, and there's more and more that come, and taking on responsibility to expand means you have to be mature. You have to think about, especially its interpersonal relationships, how to make workarounds with people. No ultimatums, but workarounds bring turnarounds, because it's a voluntary organization, and one has to know that there will be conflict, interpersonal conflict, and I'm convinced it's one's ability to deal with that type of conflict that distinguishes the level, that establishes one's level, that determines the level of one's acumen for management. But awkwardness is definitely there. Bana?
Yeah, these prayers, this whole pastime here with Lord Brahma is so incredible. And in this particular verse of the 10th chapter, verse 6, Krishna says, long penance and transcendental knowledge of self-realization had matured Brahma in practical knowledge. Thus he knew what to do, and he drank the wind completely along with the water. And the first sentence, Prabhupada said, Lord Brahma's struggle for existence is a personal example of the continued fight between the living entities in the material world and the illusory energy called Maya. So I was just thinking how, the more we become absorbed in transcendental vibration and reading these pastimes, the more the difference between us being in this material conditioned world and transcendental, effect of hearing and chanting starts to blur the reality of where we are and what we're doing. And I was just thinking how Brahma's struggle, like we're like, in a sense, Lord Brahmas, we have like a whole universe within to deal with and to be able to, utilize everything properly. And there are all these challenges that come up. They may be health, they may be like in management, external problems, whatever. But if we're able to apply what Krishna is telling Brahma here, we can see our success similar to how, amazing it is to read about Brahma's success.
Thank you, Brahma. We have to hold it because we're already over. Can you bring it back when we start the next session? I don't want to cut everyone's pre-lunch break. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Radha Govinda, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. 18 Thakur Goriyaki Gori Karayachana Atmasat 18 Charan Vandantine Moranat. If you so desire, please let us, please give us the power of distinguishing Maya from illusion. Thank you for considering our Maya reality from illusion. Yeah. For the welfare of all. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Gaur Premanande. Nitai Gaura Haribo. 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Haribo. Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo. Vanchakopdurvishcha Kripasindabevacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nantakoti Vaishnaviniki Jai. Lunch break starts at 2. Be back here at 4. And you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Hare Krishna.